a double murderer who is serving a 43-year sentence has begun identifying as female and wants to be transferred to a women's prison. Naturally, Teena McQueen was convicted of the brutal murders of Bill and Pamela Waitman, but Terry now calls himself Mackenzie and has they-them pronouns, which for some reason the Daily Telegraph chose to obediently respect today, mangling the English language in the process in an otherwise excellent report. Let's bring in Sky News contributors Teena McQueen and Prue McSween. Teena, the Minns government has come out strong against this. It's very unwoke of them, I've got to say. Acting New South Wales Premier Ryan Park told the Daily Telegraph the proposed transfer won't be happening. He said, "This individual is convicted of murdering a woman. I don't find it acceptable, and I don't think the community would find it acceptable. It won't be happening." What do you make of that? Is that fair enough? Because the state does now have fairly so-called progressive laws where you can identify as another gender, you can change your documentation to reflect that even.
I bet they're regretting those change of laws now, Rita. This is a strong statement. And, you know, I'm really pleased to see the Minns government is making some sensible decisions. I mean, this is madness. There's no way in hell this guy should be allowed anywhere near a female prison. The community's not going to cop it. No one's going to cop it. It's just reached a point where it's insanity. And good on the Minns government. And let's hope they stick to it, because they'll get hammered if they don't, Rita.
Prue, there are around 50 inmates inside New South Wales prisons who identify as transgender, so I don't think this issue is going away anywhere. I can tell you right here in Melbourne, in our biggest female prison, we do have a male who identifies as female, who is a sexual predator housed with women, and those women, many of them are terrified. They've signed petitions to have him removed, and no one in this state is listening to them. So at least things are a little bit different in New South Wales at the moment, Prue.
Well, yes, good on Chris Minns' government, but isn't his government, like all the Labor governments, unable to define what a woman is? So there's a bit of a conflict there, I have to say. This bloke who claims to have transitioned or wants to transition is a proven liar. He murdered these people, parents of a friend of his, by suffocating them. He then lied and said that they were in a car accident. So he's a proven liar. He's calculating, and he's decided that he's going to take an opportunity to, be exposed and, threaten, I guess, women in a women's prison if he's given this nod. So let's hope that what the Minns government is saying is true and they do not accommodate him.
Rita, I hope all those guys in Victoria that, are in a female prison, I hope they've had all their male bits chopped off, because that should be a prerequisite for any of these fools trying to stay in a women's prison when they're males.
Well, I can tell you the case I was referencing, they haven't had their bits chopped off, to use that expression. They're intact and in a women's prison. So it's just pure madness. But this state is lost, and you don't want to be following in our footsteps, I can say that much. Now, Donald Trump has threatened to hit Australia with tariffs of 200% on pharmaceuticals, one of our biggest exports to the US. Last year, we exported more than $2 billion worth of pharmaceuticals. President Trump also announced plans for a 50% tariff on copper. Again, another one of our major exports. Teena, what is the Albanese government doing to secure an advantageous deal for the country?
They're doing nothing, and they shouldn't be shocked by this, because President Trump, in both his terms, is doing exactly what he said he was going to do, and the Albanese government has had plenty of time to prepare to try and get round this. It's disgraceful that they've made no attempt to speak to meet with President Trump. He's too busy visiting China. So I think it's all a little bit too late. Like I said, that President Trump has no time for Rudd. It's a real mess. But like I said, the Australian government should not be shocked by this, and they should have been preparing all along for President Trump to introduce these tariffs and making a great relationship with him to try and, keep them as low as possible. And they haven't. It's absolutely, it's disgraceful. So we're in for a bit of a thump, I'd say, Rita.
Well, Prue, we saw those letters go out from the Trump administration. More than a dozen countries got their trade arrangements organised. Australia isn't amongst them. We continue to be an outlier, and it's not a great situation when we're talking about our biggest ally. We should be having the most advantageous deal on the table. But it seems like Kevin Rudd is a massive impediment to that happening. We need to have an ambassador that the Trump administration has some respect for and is willing to work with.
Well, he's a total liability, but of course the Labor mates take precedence over the national interests, and so he's going to, stand by him. And meanwhile, we all suck eggs and suffer. When you look at the hypocrisy of this government, they did this big fanfare about, the Made in Australia, the future Made in Australia campaign. Where is the manufacturing? Why are we having to rely on, the other export markets? We don't make enough here. We're closing down manufacturing because of the absurdity of our energy policies and our IR policies. So we are reliant on these exports. It's $2 billion a year for just the pharmaceutical stuff, but we've never made any case to save that industry. So what can you do? We've just got to suck it up because we've got an inept government.
Now let's go to Queensland. A major music festival called Earth Frequency Festival has been forced to defend itself from claims of racism. Its pro-Palestinian organisers are making musical acts sign an ethics pledge. It's led to one act, a duo from Israel, pulling out of the festival. This so-called ethics pledge includes things like acknowledging Israel's genocide in Gaza and rejecting racism, apartheid and genocide. But it's the ethics of the organisers and their definition of those terms.
Well, the ethics of the organisers who are, of course, associated with Palestinian organisations. This is what's happening in this country. It's quite insidious where you have Anthony Albanese saying we won't stand for anti-Semitism, yet he is. And it's inveigling itself through every aspect of our lives, and we're doing nothing and have done nothing. He appointed a Jewish woman to be an advisor. He's only just now getting around to adopting some of her recommendations. They turn a blind eye because we know where their sympathies lie. They're anti-Israel, and this is the problem. And so it's insidious, it's scary, and it's not going away fast because we have governments that are not turning a blind eye to it for political reasons.
Well, we saw some really ugly scenes in Glastonbury, which I'm being shocked by how quickly those chants from Glastonbury have spread, because we keep hearing these death to IDF chants now here in Australia. And really, it began with that idiot rap duo chanting that on stage. Teena, in this case, the festival has, after a considerable backlash, softened its position. They've revised the policy, and they're saying they're going to be banning political flags and protests at this October event. But we see this over and over again with the artistic community. They're not standing with members of the Jewish community. They're very clear in where their loyalties lie.
That's right, Rita. And it was so bad in Glastonbury that the BBC had to apologise for even showing the clip. That's how shocking it was against the Jewish community over there. And I'd hate to see that repeated here. Look, it's all right to say they're going to pull back and revise. I don't believe a word of it. I think they're just, saying what needs to be said for the festival to go ahead. Then they'll do as they like.
Now, let's go back to the US. A new book called 2024, How Trump Retook the White House and the Democrats Lost America, details the influential role Jill Biden played in her husband's administration. Teena, this influence only increased as the president's cognitive decline became more and more pronounced. Teena, I do wonder, did we already have a female president?
Look, Dr. Jill, I think, fully took the reins, and sadly, I think the more he declined, the more power herself and her Chief of Staff, Barnoff, got. You know, they covered up everything. This book is an absolute bombshell and totally says how Dr. Jill and her Chief of Staff pretty much ran everything. And the Chief of Staff now, who has been called to a couple of inquiries and the White House refused to go, has a lot to answer for. I think Trump is going to really, really drill deep on this. But of course, Dr. Jill and her Chief of Staff are in a protected species, and the Chief of Staff is now heading up the President Biden library. But I think the full truth, it's coming out now, and we all knew. I mean, we all witnessed it, and it's disgraceful how everything was covered up.
It was, and I wonder, Teena, whether we'll ever know who really ran the show, and not just for those last few months. Prue, the cognitive decline was obvious from the start. We were covering it in the election campaign, in the 2020 election campaign. Do you think we'll ever have any sort of transparency on who made some of these big calls, who decided, even in the final days, was going to be on the pardon list, the presidential pardon list?
Well, there's been such a cover-up, and when you look at how Jill Biden attended Hunter's trials, even when she had to travel, overnight from, international countries, the influence was cancerous. I also wonder how much Obama had a play in it all as well, although Jill seems to be such a power-hungry type and a controlling type. The fact that she's a doctor too, she knew what was wrong with her husband, but
well,
power,
she's not a real doctor, Prue. She's
well, whatever she was.
No, she's not. She's got a doctorate in education, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, she needed to learn a few things about democracy and why he was perhaps appointed, and that, it was totally undemocratic for the wife, the +1, to be running the country if that's the case. But, there was something so smelly about that whole administration and the Democratic Party, and it's all coming out, and it needs to. And, people throw a lot of mud at Trump, but this is so much worse.
The House committees are not giving up. They're still requesting they appear. We'll see what the consequences of these guys refusing to appear continually.
No, I think they're going to be digging continuously into precisely what happened, because I think there's some people who need to go to jail over what happened. I mean, what we saw should not happen in a democracy. This is banana republic stuff. Before you two go, I do want to get your take on the Epstein saga. I'll be talking to Josh Hammer about that a little bit later in the program. But this, Teena, has the danger of fracturing the Trump base. There are some very unhappy souls, understandably so. They wanted to see these files released. They wanted to see powerful men get their comeuppance for their associations with Jeffrey Epstein. And we're now told there is no list, there is no further crime to be investigated here.
Well, I think whatever they've got to release it. Trump said he would. Elon Musk is not going to hold back on this. He's going to keep pushing. So I would strongly advise, no matter what details they've got, they must release it to the public to shut this down.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is really undermining trust in the Trump administration for the first time in this second term. Prue, what is your take on this?
Well, I think you're right. Both of you are right. And what Trump really should do is trump them, out himself. If he's been to a party at Epstein's, tell them. I just think that if he's got nothing to hide, if no women have come out of the woodwork naming Trump, then maybe he should just gazump them and do it.
Look, I really don't think that is the issue, because let's remember the FBI, the very highly politicised FBI, the Biden administration, had these files for years. If there was anything hinting at anyone close to Trump or Trump himself, it would have leaked. I don't think that is the issue. I think whatever evidence they had has been destroyed. They knew who was coming in. They knew Kash Patel was going to be FBI director.
Yeah.
That's my suspicion, unless there are still people within the FBI and the Justice Department who are not acting in the full interests of the justice system and transparency. But yeah, I think this is something that Donald Trump can't ignore. I think he wants to move on from it and concentrate on other things. But this is a matter of trust. Teena McQueen, Rita McQueen, thank you so much for your time tonight.